Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode, we will be covering the Kievan Rus Empire and the Ghaznavids, or the Ghaznavid Empire. And as well, from each empire, we will highlight a specific leader. In this episode, from the Kievan Rus, we will highlight Vladimir the Great, also known as Saint Vladimir. And from the Ghazvinids, we will highlight Mahmud of Ghazni. So two very important leaders and also two very important empires too. They are also quite large as well, as we shall see, and also quite religiously significant as well. So, and also at the very end of the episode, in the spirit of Plutarch's Parallel Lives, a great book by the author Plutarch, we will have a comparison of the two leaders at the end between Vladimir the Great and Mahmud of Ghazni, to perhaps learn about what makes them unique through their differences, but also effectually and retroactively learn more about their respective empires as well. So without further ado, we will start with the first empire, the Kievan Rus. So the Kievan Rus is one of the most significant chapters in the development of Eastern Europe. As we have covered, it has actually ended some of our previous empires, as we shall see. For example, the Bulgarian Empire, which was an empire, the first Bulgarian Empire, however, the first Bulgarian was the largest and most notable of the Bulgarian empires, was defeated by the Kievan Rus. So important empire, as we shall see, for many other reasons as well. The Kievan Rus is also known as the Kievan Rus, if my pronunciation is hopefully correct there, was a state and later an amalgam of principalities ruled under one leader, eventually forming an empire, thus, by many definitions, in Eastern and Northern Europe from the late 9th to the mid-13th centuries, CE, Common Era. The name was coined by Russian historians in the 19th century, so consider this at the time. They were not calling themselves the Kievan Rus at the time. And they encompassed a variety of polities and peoples, as we shall see, including East Slavic, Norse, and Finnic peoples. It was ruled by the Rurik dynasty. There's a video game I used to play called Ages of Empires, and there was the Runic dynasty. I think it's based off the Rurik dynasty. And it was founded by the Varangian Prince Rurik, who was a prince of Rurik, who was a famous king in the video game. So I imagine it's connected. And the modern nations of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine all claim Kievan Rus as their cultural ancestor. So they all claim roots from this important empire. So even today, as we'll study these, as we study these countries and we'll study these empires, we can learn a lot about them through learning about their sort of, or one of the earliest points through the Kievan Rus, or at least one of the earliest empires. The modern nations of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine all claim Kievan Rus as their cultural ancestor as well, so they're proud of it too, with Belarus and Russia deriving their name from it even. Belarus, Kievan Rus, and Russia, Rus, and Kiev, which is obviously in the Ukraine. Well, not obviously, maybe you didn't perhaps know that, but it is in the Ukraine, so all very important. The Kievan Rus. At its greatest extent in the mid-11th century, the Kievan Rus stretched from the White Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south, from the headwaters of the Vistula to the west to the Tanin Peninsula in the east, uniting the East Slavic tribes. So kind of, I think, quite poetic, from the north, the White Sea to the Black Sea. I think it's quite, and very, not quite, and quite wide as well. So, as for the rise and fall, which will be the way we focus, or sort of the structure we'll focus for all the empires we're covering, so I think that's the way. I think it's Schirer's rise and fall of the Third Reich is based on decline and fall of the Roman Empire, which is necessarily falling. But I think by seen a rise and fall, we can see what makes an empire great, but also why it falls. And I think inevitably every empire has a rise and fall. They haven't already fallen yet, or if they've yet to fall, pardon me. So, starting with the rise, in the 9th and 10th centuries CE. The formation and early expansion starting in the 9th century. So the Kievan Rus Empire emerged around the 9th century CE in the region of now modern Ukraine, Belarus, and Western Russia. It began as a loose federation of East Slavic tribes. So a federation, there's a difference between a federation and a confederation. A federation is a stronger form of government than a confederation. That's what the Federalist Papers is about, is turning the Confederation of States to the United States. Very important. So it sounds like it might be disputes, but it's a federation is like the United States, so it is it is one nation. Primarily the Polans, Drevlians, and Severians under the leadership of the Varangians, a group of Norsemen led by King or Prince Rurik. As for the Oleg's reign, O-L-E-G, from 882 to 912 CE, Oleg of Novgorod, Rurik's successor, is credited with expanding the Rus' influence southward. So they start from the north and then started to move south. He conquered Kiev and established it as the capital of the fledgling empire, laying the foundation for their dominance. So it's important to note that Kiev was actually not the capital at the very start. It actually became the capital, not under Prince Rurik or King Rurik. It was under Oleg's reign that Kiev actually became the capital of the Kievan Rus. Hence, it wasn't necessarily called the Kievan Rus at the time. As for the important Christianization from 882 to 912 CE, Prince Vladimir the Great, whom we will cover in a specific biography, embraced Christianity in 988 CE, marking a pivotal moment in the history of the Kievan Rus, so kind of like a Constantine figure, bringing Christianity to the empire. Very important cultural shift and political and religious shift in many ways as well. This conversion to Orthodox Christianity specifically strengthened the ties with the Byzantine Empire, which had also established Christianity, and facilitated cultural and religious integration with the wider Christian world. So we have covered the Byzantine Empire as well, so we can see a lot of parallels and interactions here in that they even perhaps emulated them. We've seen with some perhaps leaders have adopted religions both for internal reasons, both to benefit through maybe to consolidate the state or make the people happy, but also to create alliances with other empires. For example, this great strength in their ties with the Byzantine Empire, also Christian. As for the Golden Ages in the 11th and 12th centuries, the 11th and 12th centuries are often considered the golden age of the Kievan Rus. During this period, Kiev became a major trading hub linking northern Europe with the Byzantine Empire and the Muslim world as well. The empire prospered economically, culturally, and politically at this time, so that was the peak as well. Further details as for the Principality of Kiev. So the Kiev Rus was structured as a loose federation of principalities ruled by princes, with Kiev as the dominant center. The princes often vied for power and influence, leading to various periods of instability and conflict within the empire. But still strong enough to be considered a federation and therefore one single empire. But some might dispute this, but I think it's strong enough to the fact that they were able to conquer others but there were periods of greater centralized government and lesser centralized government, or greater centralized control. So perhaps maybe one might say it wasn't an empire for the entirety of it, but it certainly qualified as an empire at one time. And I think I would make the argument from the whole period we're covering here, it would be considered an empire, but the periods outside of that, it would no longer be considered one unified empire. So, but as for the beginning of the fall, so starting with internal division, which is often, we almost always see internal and external factors, but which one comes first and which one is greater is always different. So the unity of the Kievan Rus began to erode due to internal strife and conflicts between rival princes, perhaps because this federal structure. In the mid-12th century, the empire fragmented into several smaller principalities, each asserting its independence. So maybe one of the common themes for empires to dissipate is through fragmentation. Others is outright conquering, but this is perhaps maybe perhaps more common in the European setting where there's more greater number of rulers, perhaps. But then same thing I could also say perhaps in our China settings where we have, for example, the warring states. So nonetheless, I think it's equally likely across geographies thus far I observed to have either fragmentation or outright conquering. As for the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, so in 1223, the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan, a very important empire we will soon cover, a famous book that inspired my life, was by Khan Eagledon, Wolf of the Plains, was about Temujin, Genghis Khan, very great nomadic empire who united the tribes. We've covered many nomadic empires that even came before Genghis Khan and maybe influenced or inspired Genghis Khan. But nonetheless, now we're starting to get to the time of Genghis Khan, which is quite exciting for me particularly. And Genghis Khan's successors launched an invasion of the Kievan Rus. This wasn't Genghis Khan himself, however. And although the initial incursion was repelled by at the Battle of the Kulka River, it was followed by a more devastating invasion in the mid-13th century under Batu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan. So ultimately were defeated by the Mongol Empire. But it wasn't like that was not a very formidable foe to be defeated by. It wasn't like they got defeated by some small foe. But at the same time, they'd also fragmented at that time, so the internal factors set them up perhaps for a more easy defeat, or perhaps a defeat at all. But as for the destruction of Kiev in 1240, marking the year of the end of the empire officially, in 1240 the Mongols besieged and sacked Kiev, dealing a severe blow to the Kievan Rus Empire. The city was left in ruins and many of its inhabitants were killed and enslaved. So it's most of the time in our empires when they capture the capital, it's generally done. Some flee and form new empires, for example, as we saw with some of our caliphates, for example. As for subjugation and fragmentation, the Mongol invasion resulted in the subjugation of the Kievan Rus principalities to the Mongol Empire, so they became subordinate. No longer could we consider it an empire of its own, known as the Golden Horde, but still a very grand name, and the region fell into a state of political fragmentation, however, and subordinate rule to the Mongols, with the Mongols exerting control over the fractured principalities, so perhaps their own division allowed for the Mongols to defeat them and rule them. So as for the legacy, while the Kievan Rus Empire ceased to exist as a unified political entity, its legacy endured in its successor states that emerged in its remnants, such as the Grand Duchy of Moscow and the Principality of Galicia Volhynia. Additionally, pardon me for my pronunciation there. Additionally, Orthodox Christianity, adopted during the empire's heyday, remained significant cultural and religious influence in the region, and it remains a prominent religion in this region as well. So the adoption under Vladimir, or Saint Vladimir, brought perhaps this Orthodox, or maybe he wasn't this singular cause, or maybe he was just a cog in the wheel, but at least he had some influence, I would say. So thus, the rise of the Kievan Rus marked a crucial period in the history of Eastern Europe, characterized by political consolidation, cultural exchange, and economic prosperity. However, internal divisions, perhaps the reason for its climb in the first place, external invasions, and the eventual Mongol conquest led to its decline and fragmentation in the 13th century. So that is the rise and fall of the Kievan Rus, as we can cover here. So as for Vladimir the Great, or Saint Vladimir of the Kievan Rus, so the Kievan Rus Empire, also known as the Rus Khaganate, in fact, as well, was a medieval East Slavic state that existed from the 9th to the 13th century, as we mentioned. And while there were several notable rulers, such as Rurik and Oleg, Rurik the first prince, perhaps, of Kievan Rus, or Oleg, the founder of Kiev as its capital, Vladimir, the Saint Vladimir stands out as unique, and perhaps the one we will highlight in this episode, or certainly the one we will highlight in this episode. And one of the most significant leaders, in fact, was the Grand Prince Vladimir I, also known as Vladimir the Great. Therefore, we seek to find a history of his life to perhaps maybe learn a bit about how to live our own lives, perhaps. So Vladimir I Sviatoslavich, or Volodymyr the First, Sviatoslavich, and the Christian name was Basil. It was born circa 958 on perhaps the 15th, and lived until the 15th of July in 1015 CE. And he was given the epithet the Great. So I don't just arbitrarily add I basically go with the most common name for each leader, and in this it happens to be the Great. So it isn't just me trying to elevate him above other leaders. And he was the Prince of Novgorod from 970 and Grand Prince of Kiev from 978 until his death in 1015 CE. The Eastern Orthodox Church canonized him as Saint Vladimir. So, as we shall see, history of his life. So starting with his further name again, Vladimir Sviatoslavich, or Vladimir the Great. His birth name was he was born around 958 in Novgorod, so not born in the capital itself, and the son of Sviatoslav, or maybe he was born in Kiev, but allegedly maybe he might not have been, but he still had royal blood, being Grand Prince of Kiev later, and because he was son of the Grand Prince, and I believe perhaps maybe even Kiev might be in the Novgorod province, or at least very close. And nonetheless, his father was the king of Kiev, so he probably had, or he seemed to have the most powerful lineage. But he was the one who expanded it and made it great as well. However, he was a bastard as well. His mother was Malusha was a servant woman of Varangian or Scandinavian origin. So although his father may have given him significant advantages, his mother might have given him disadvantages as well. But nonetheless, he still managed to rise to be the ruler of Kiev and the empire. So, as for his early life, he was born, once again, in 958, and Vladimir was the illegitimate and youngest son of Sviatoslav I of Kiev. So that's against perhaps all odds, the very last child and the illegitimate one, by his housekeeper, Malusha. Malusha is described as Norse Sagas, as a prophetess who lived to the age of 100 and was brought from a cave to the palace to predict the future. Malusha's brother, Dobrynia, was Vladimir's tutor and most trusted advisor. So it seems like he still had a good relationship with his brothers, despite him ultimately taking the power. And allegedly his mother was quite a spiritual and quite a significant woman, allegedly living to 100 years old and being trusted to predict the future. Malusha's brother, was his tutor and trusted advisor, so perhaps his relationship with his brothers may not have been good. Hagiographic tradition of dubious authenticity also connects his childhood with the name of his grandmother, Olga of Kiev, who was Christian and governed the capital of Sviatoslav's frequent military campaigns. So Vladimir spent his early years in Novgorod, where he was likely influenced by the diverse cultural and religious atmosphere of the city, so it seems to be a different area from Kiev. It included, and it also had Norse paganism here as well, so it wasn't like he was brought up in an entirely Christian area, which he later adopted, or Eastern Orthodox Christianity, consolidating his rule over Kiev and surrounding territories later in his life. But somehow he came to be power. Somehow I actually was not able to find where, but he, against all odds, came to be the king of Kiev. Maybe he was the most formidable. Maybe there was murder going on. It's hard to say. I was not able to find. But nonetheless, he converted to Christianity. One of the most significant in his reign was his conversion to Christianity in 988 CE, where Vladimir decided to adopt Christianity as the official religion of the Kievan Rus, a decision that influenced political, strategic, and personal factors, as we saw with his relationship with the Byzantine Empire. As we can see actually now on the map here, Novgorod is much north from Kiev, so he was even born on the opposite side of Kiev from the Byzantine Empire. So if it was motivated to be in strengthening relations with the Byzantine Empire, it certainly perhaps wasn't necessarily from his birth that this idea came. Or maybe having already traveled, he was excited to further expand continuously. As for a bit about his rise to power, after the death of his father, Sviatoslav I, in 972 CE, a power struggle ensued among his sons for control of the Kievan Rus. Vladimir eventually emerged victorious, consolidating the rule over Kiev and his surrounding territories. To what extent was an outright battle seems most probable. Was it assassination? I think that would have been more likely brought up. But nonetheless, he defeated his brothers and came out victorious to rule Kiev. According to historical accounts, Vladimir explored various religions before choosing Christianity, so perhaps it wasn't just for political reasons. He explored others, coming from a diverse city, for example, of Novgorod. He sent emissaries to study the major religions of the time, including Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, so took a holistic approach, perhaps. After learning about Byzantine Christianity, however, he was impressed by its ceremonial splendor and decided to embrace it. But it was the ceremonial splendor that originally attracted him, was a unique point. As for his baptism in Chersonesus, In 988 CE, Vladimir traveled to the Byzantine Empire and was baptized to the city of Chersonesus, so very long journey at the time, which is in modern-day Crimea, by the Byzantine clergy. So, but it's interesting to note how far extended north the Byzantine Empire up to Crimea, or the Eastern Roman Empire. After learning, and he received his baptism there. His baptismal name was Basil, in honor of Basil the second, of the Byzantine Empire. So his honorary name, or his baptismal name, is Basil. Vladimir's baptism marked the beginning of the Christianization of Kiev, the Kievan Rus as well. So before that, it was notably Christian, or at least was perhaps maybe predominantly pagan, or at least religiously agnostic in the region as well. As for his consolidation of power, following his conversion to Christianity, Vladimir embarked on a series of reforms aimed at strengthening his rule and centralizing power in the Kievan Rus. He established a network of fortified towns and improved the administration of justice. As for his military campaigns, Vladimir's reign was marked by military campaigns and conquest as well. So a saint, but also a military victor, which aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, according to this account. He launched successful campaigns against neighboring tribes and principalities, extending to the Kievan Rus' influence over vast territories in Eastern Europe. As for his legacy, Vladimir's conversion to Christianity and his subsequent efforts to spread the faith had a profound and lasting impact on the Kievan Rus and perhaps Eastern Orthodox Christianity in the region even today. Christianity became deeply rooted in culture and identity in the Eastern Slavic peoples, today even. Vladimir is remembered as a pivotal figure in the history of Eastern Europe, revered as a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church for his role in the Christianization of the Kievan Rus and promoting its cultural and political development. Thus, Vladimir the Great, or Vladimir the Saint, was a crucial ruler of the Kievan Rus, whose conversion to Christianity and efforts to centralize power and expand the empire's influence, important to note the centralization of power, which ultimately later caused its decline, was something that he focused on in his own, to prevent its decline during his own time, left a lasting and indelible mark on the history of Eastern Europe. So that is Vladimir the Great and the Kievan Rus. As for the content of the slide, so the title, Vladimir the Great and the Kievan Rus, also known as the Kievan Rus. It was a state and amalgam of principalities in Eastern, pardon me missing the end there, and Northern Europe, encompassing East Slavic, Norse, and Finnic people, and ruled by the Rurik dynasty. The significant leader, however, must be noted, for example, Vladimir I was a bastard, but still goes through the patrilineal side, so still ruled by the Rurik dynasty. Significant leader is Vladimir Sviatoslavich. Empire was the Kievan Rus. Period was circa, that means approximately 880 to 1240, which is considered during the medieval period. The modern locations include the Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, and Moldova. Million square kilometers is 2.1, with the equivalent of million square kilometers is 0.81. So our average empire size is 1 size, so a little bit larger even than our largest empires, but it's also a federation, so less centralized government. So, but it's also very military. There's a lot of sedentary people, so there are some Khans as well, so it's also considered a khaganate. So there were some nomadic peoples here as well, but nonetheless it wouldn't be an easy area of land to control. So that my point here is that given an arbitrary number of square kilometers aren't all equal. Here is a harder, perhaps a difficult area of land to control, and still larger than our average largest empire size. And as percent of the world, that's 1.56%, excluding Antarctica. Capital was Kiev, or came Kiev under Oleg's rule, and remained and considered called the Kievan Rus. And there was only one before it, and that was under Prince Rurik, or King Rurik. The government was a monarchy. The common languages include Old East Slavic, Old Church Slavonic, which is the literary language, Old Norse, and Finnic languages. The religions included Slavic paganism, which was the native religion of the Slavs, Reformed state paganism, which was the official religion until the 10th century, and Orthodox Christianity, which was the official after the 10th century, after, as we know, Saint Vladimir, or Vladimir the Great. And as well, there was Norse paganism, which was still a local religion, and Finnish paganism, which was the religion of the Finnish people, who were also under this empire. The population was likely in the several of millions to up to 10 millions, but likely not much over 10 millions, which is still quite a large population considering some of our earlier empires. But considering the population there today, a little bit smaller, but still up to 10 million is still quite a large population. Considering that, but also they're restricted by technologies at the time, for example. So as for images, in the top left we have an image of Saint Vladimir, who is considered equal to the apostles in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and that's an image of him. And he's under Eastern Orthodox Church. He's canonized as a saint. To the right of that, we have some coins. On the left, we have Vladimir the Great coin, which was produced in the 10th or the 11th century. And on the right, we have Yaroslav the Wise's coin, produced in the 11th century. Looks like a trident-like figure to me. It's a very unique shape, more perhaps an eagle to me, but a unique shape that I haven't seen in other empires so far. As for that I can recall at least. As to the right of that, we have, as for the image, the bottom right, we have Rurik, princely, receiving a tribute from gathering a tribute from his own people, which shows the tax gatherings, but also shows necessarily some sort of private enterprise, but also showing the centralized government. As we can see, we got those strong wooden walls, as we can see, a fortress. Well dressed, but he's also dressed in similar attire to his soldiers as well, military attire. So a little better dressed, but of course similarly. And as well, we have is well armed, and we can show people showing tribute, so showing the strength of the government and therefore an empire. So prince, the first was Oleg the Wise, circa 882 to 912. He was the first. The legislator was called the Vesh. The history was which included many princes from under the Kievan Rus rulership. The history was established in circa 880. The conquest of Khazar Khaganate there was in 965 to 969, so therefore it could be considered a Khaganate as well because it controlled over Khans and Khagans. Christianization was circa 988 under Vladimir the Great. Ruskaya Pravda was in the 1050s. The Mongol invasions began in 1237 and went on until 1241, the capture of the siege of Kiev itself being in 1240, marking the end of the Kievan Rus Empire. It was preceded by the Ilmen Slavs, the Kriviches, the Chud, the Volga Finns, the Dregoviches, the Radimiches, the Eastern Polans, the Severians, the Drevlians, the Viatichis, the Nohinians, the White Croatia, Tivertsi, and the Uliches. Many of these, unfortunately, we will not cover specifically because they were not large enough empires. So the Kievan Rus makes it on the list because it's the amalgamation of many of these under a federated state. But I hope we can learn about them effectually through learning about the Kievan Rus. We cannot cover every single state that's ever existed, unfortunately, but many of these we will also cover indirectly through discussing other empires. Now, the Kievan Rus was succeeded by the Principality of Kiev, which remained under the Mongol rule, the Novgorod Republic, the Principality of Chernigov, the Principality of Preyaslavy, Vladimir Suzdal, Principality of Volhynia, Principality of Halyach, Principality of Polotsk, Principality of Smolensk, Principality of Ryazan, and of course the Mongol Empire, which ruled over many of those, if not all. And as we have it in the top right, we can see the map of the Kievan Rus showing many of the principalities. We can see the Principality of Novgorod, which is, as we can see here now, it is distinct from Kiev. So he did come from the north, but his father was the Prince of Kiev. But his mother was his cleaning woman who allegedly lived to 100. That is Vladimir the Great. And we can see the many other principalities here. And and Byzantine Empire down here, which they established Christianity, allegedly, perhaps in part, to establish a stronger relationship. So that is Vladimir the Great and the Kievan Rus. On to Mahmud, Ghazni, and the Ghaznavids. So the Ghaznavid Empire, which flourished from the 10th to the 12th centuries, played a significant role in the history of Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, we seek to find a history as well of its rise and fall. So therefore, perhaps to learn some lessons about today's empires and why they can succeed and might fail. So the Ghaznavid dynasty or the Ghaznavid Empire, was a Persianate Muslim dynasty and empire of Turkic Mamluk origin, ruling at its greatest extent large parts of Persia, Khorasan, and northwest Indian subcontinent from 977 to 1186 CE. The dynasty was founded by Sobuktigin and his succession to the rule of the Ghazni after the death of his father-in-law Alptigin, who was an ex-general of the Samanid Empire from Balkh, north of the Hindu Kush in Greater Khorasan. So, to summarize some of that, came from the son of an ex-Samanid general. So we've covered the Samanid Empire, formed a new empire from one of these generals, and became to be a very formidable empire, as we shall see, of its own, covering quite a diverse range of land from the Indian subcontinent all the way up to almost parts of Europe. Well, or at least in Persia and Khorasan, but not quite into Europe, pardon me. As for so starting with the rise of the Ghaznavid Empire, starting with the late 9th to the early 10th centuries. So the early origins, the Ghaznavid dynasty originated as from the Ghaznavid tribe, a Turkic group that settled in the region of Ghazni in present-day Afghanistan. So started in Afghanistan, or they originally settled in Afghanistan, this tribe, the Ghazni, during the late 9th century. So as for Alptigin, first historical figure we'll specifically cover, the founder of the Ghaznavid dynasty, Alptigin initially served as a slave commander under the Samanid Empire. So started slave commander, perhaps maybe not the most ethical role as considered throughout all history, but nonetheless it was sufficient for him to achieve power, it seems. And he gradually rose to prominence and established the Ghaznavid control over the Ghazni and surrounding areas. Subtigin Alptigin was succeeded by his son Subuktigin. Subuktigin was the son of Alptigin, and Subuktigin, who was further expanded the Ghaznavid dynasty through military conquest. Subuktigin's campaigns extended Ghaznavid influence into eastern Iran and northern India. So starting Afghanistan, expanding to northern Iran, or eastern Iran and northern India. As for Mahmud of Ghazni, the leader we will highlight specifically in a biography to come, the most renowned ruler of the Ghaznavid dynasty, Mahmud of Ghazni, ascended to the throne in 998 CE. He was a formidable military leader and patron of the arts and sciences as well, as we shall see. As for his conquests, Mahmud launched numerous military campaigns, primarily directed towards the Indian subcontinent. His expeditions aimed to plunder wealth, expand territory, and spread Islam. So that religious source, as we shall see, is an important cause for this empire. Mahmud's conquest, but also economic reasons as well, and just the concept of greater territory for greater resources, starting perhaps from a slave commander, or was sort of the first leader. Perhaps they were enslaving many of these people, and they saw it as a way of subordination, as a way to wealth, perhaps. Or perhaps they were spreading Islam as perhaps under a way that they believed to be virtuous, or perhaps in fact is virtuous. Mahmud's conquest reached deep into northern India, including the rich temples of the Hindu kingdom. So imagine at the time that these individuals from far off, coming from originally settling in Afghanistan, reaching down to these famous Hindu temples. We've covered many Indian empires throughout history, starting from the Indus Valley civilizations, many throughout history, and now we have this empire invading them. So it's very impressive, but also in some ways quite tragic as well. It's sad to see as well, but also impressive, at least for this empire, at least in terms of their own objectives, or in terms of achieving their own objectives. Mahmud's conquest reached deep into the northern Indian continent, as mentioned, deep into northern India. As for cultural patronage, despite being a Muslim ruler, Mahmud was known for his tolerance towards religious minorities and his patronage of Persian learning, art, and scholarship. His court attracted poets, scholars, and artisans from across the Islamic world. But as for its decline and fall, starting in the mid-11th and 12th to the 12th centuries CE. As for succession issues, after Mahmud's death in 1030 CE, the Ghaznavid Empire faced internal strife and succession disputes among his descendants. This weakened the central authority and led to fragmentation within the empire. So, as we've seen, many empires and succession disputes is a common theme, and the Ghaznavids were not immune from it, and ultimately were subjected to it following the death of Mahmud of Ghazni. As for an external factor, the Seljuk invasions. So the rise of the Seljuk Turks in Central Asia posed a significant threat to the Ghaznavid Empire. The Seljuk invasions and incursions into Ghaznavid territory further eroded its power and influence. As for the Ghurid onslaught, another external factor, the Ghurid dynasty emerging from the mountainous regions of central Afghanistan, perhaps where they originally even originated from, began to challenge the Ghaznavid authority in the late 11th century. The Ghurids gradually expanded their control, capturing Ghazni and other key Ghaznavid strongholds, so capturing Ghazni itself, which is where Mahmud is from and their original lineage traces its roots from. So, as for its final decline, by the early 12th century, the Ghaznavid Empire had lost much of its territory and influence. The Ghaznavids emerged as the Ghurids at this time emerged as the dominant power in the region, and marking the end of the Ghaznavid dynasty's rule. So thus, the Ghaznavid Empire rose to prominence under Mahmud of Ghazni's rule, reaching its zenith through military conquest and cultural patronage, but also to some degree religious tolerance, but maybe that wasn't a reason for its success, but at least it was something it was characterized by. However, internal conflicts, external threats, and the rise of rival powers led to its eventual decline and fall by the 12th century, or even the early 12th century, or by the 12th century. It seems even, yes, perhaps by even the late 12th century, but there's it lost much of its territory starting in the early 12th, but by the late it was ultimately defeated. So as for a biography of Mahmud of Ghazni, who ruled over the peak power of the zenith of the power of the Ghaznavids. So the most important ruler perhaps of the Ghaznavid Empire was Mahmud of Ghazni. I have friends named Mahmud. I wonder if there's a connection directly between their names and Mahmud of Ghazni. If so, it's a very honorable name, according to my reading of history, who reigned from 998 to 1030 CE. Mahmud's rule marked the height of the Ghaznavid Empire's power and influence. Therefore, we seek to find history or biography of his life. So Abu al-Qasim Mahmud ibn Sebutijin, this is full name. Remember, Sebutijin was one of our earliest rulers of the Ghaznavid Empire as well. Romanized, it was born on the 2nd of November. It makes him a Scorpio, I believe, and from 971, but that's also a Western tradition, perhaps necessarily, or perhaps it does happen in fact across cultures as well, and died on the 30th of April, 1030 CE, but important to note. As usually known as Mahmud of Ghazni or Mahmud Ghaznavi, was Sultan of the Ghaznavid Empire, ruler of the Ghaznavid Empire, ruling from 998 to 1030 CE. During his reign in medieval sources, he is usually known by his honorific title Yamin al-Dawla, or the right hand of the state. Interesting note that showed that connection between him being the ruler of the state, but the right hand sort of acting for the state, but not necessarily being the state himself. So important to note, and that's in his name. At the time of his death, his kingdom had been transformed from an extensive military empire, which extended from northwestern Iran proper to the Punjab in the Indian subcontinent, Khwarazm in Transonia, and Makram. So huge territorial extent, in large part due to his own military contributions. So as for his early life and ascension to the throne, Mahmud was born in the town of Ghazni in the region of Kabulistan, which is in present-day Afghanistan, on the 2nd of November 971. His father, Sebutijin, was a Turkic slave commander who laid foundations to the Ghaznavid dynasty in Ghazni in 977, which he ruled as a subordinate of the Sabanids, who ruled Khorasan and Traxonia. Mahmud's mother was an Iranian woman from a wealthy landowning aristocrat family in the region of Zabulistan, and he is therefore known in some sources as Mahmud il-Zabuli, or Mahmud from Zabulistan. Not much is known about Mahmud's early life, however, unfortunately, other than that he was a schoolmate and foster brother of Ahmed Mayamadi, a Persian native of Zabulistan. So at least he had some friend, at least, or some relation, but not much is known about his school life. It was likely quite privileged as well, as he would ultimately become the Sultan. Mahmud was raised in the court of Ghazni as well, and received a princely education, including training in military tactics, administration, and Islamic scholarship. Upon the death of his father in 997 CE, Mahmud succeeded him as ruler of the Ghaznavid Empire, as Sultan. Despite facing challenges from rival claimants, so it wasn't an easy, necessarily ascension to the throne, he still managed to gain it, and Mahmud managed to consolidate his power and assert authority over the empire. As for his military campaigns and conquests, so perhaps maintaining the momentum after defeating his rival claimants, he engaged in military campaigns and conquests. So Mahmud's reign was characterized by numerous military campaigns aimed at expanding the Ghaznavid Empire and spreading Islam. He launched a series of campaigns in the Indian subcontinent, primarily targeting the Hindu kingdoms of northern India. Mahmud's expeditions were motivated by a combination of religious zeal to expand Islam, desire for plunder, and territorial expansion. Mahmud's most famous military campaign was the 17 invasions of India. 17 invasions is a lot. Particularly his conquest of the wealthy temple city of Samnath of Gujarat in 1026 CE. We have seen some of the beautiful Indian architecture at this time in some of our previous episodes. So, pardon me, we can only imagine the sort of, maybe perhaps the motivation to try to capture and take these that they had not built and to plunder them, but also the perhaps mesmerizing and perhaps tantalizing effect that they might have had to the Ghaznavid Empire. Perhaps all speculation, but it's just a beautiful black backdrop at the very minimum for these conquests. Mahmud's most famous military campaign was, once again, were those 17 invasions of India, which were an onslaught of attacks, certainly. This campaign brought immense wealth and prestige to Mahmud and the Ghaznavid Empire, as much, for example, the Roman Empire relied a lot on plunder, etc. As for cultural patronage, and for example, this empire also traces its roots from early slave owners, so perhaps they also believed in enslaving these people too, or at least taking their property. As for cultural patronage and administration, despite being a military conqueror, Mahmud was also known for his patronage of the arts, literature, and scholarship. He attracted poets, scholars, and artisans to the courts, making Ghazni a center of cultural and intellectual activity. So, perhaps maybe if he wasn't successful militarily, he might not have engaged in these, but at least at this, since he succeeded at both at this point. Or maybe he would not have been successful at his military achievements if he had not been such a good patron of the arts, perhaps, or intellectual activity as well. Mahmud's court was renowned for its lavish patronage of Persian literature and poetry. He sponsored the work of scholars such as Ferdowsi, who was the author of epic poem Shamanesh, and encouraged the translation of Arabic and Greek texts into Persian. As for his religious policy, while Mahmud was a devout Sunni Muslim, so we can distinguish that some more, so our Shia Muslim empires, such as the Fatimid Caliphate, he demonstrated tolerance towards religious minorities of the empire. So he appointed Hindus and Buddhists to administrative positions and allowed them to practice their faiths freely. So despite often plundering, etc., he did allow them to express their own faiths freely. However, Mahmud also pursued policy of religious Islamic expansionism, using military force to spread Islam and establish Muslim rule in the territories he conquered. So perhaps the balance of probabilities is certainly more in favor of Islam, but to some degree there are, allegedly he was to some degree religiously tolerant, or at least relatively more religiously tolerant than some of his peers. As for his legacy, Mahmud of Ghazni is remembered as one of the most powerful and influential rulers of the medieval Islamic world. His conquest expanded the boundaries of the Ghaznavid Empire and established Ghazni as a major political and cultural center in Central Asia. Mahmud's patronage of the arts, literature, and contributed to a flourishing Persian culture during the medieval period, and he is celebrated as a hero in Persian literature and folklore. And he is immortalized in epic poems and legends as well. So thus Mahmud of Ghazni was a dynamic and ambitious ruler whose military conquests, cultural patronage, and religious policies left a lasting impact on the history of the Ghaznavid Empire and the broader Islamic world. So that is Mahmud of Ghazni, very important leader, very perhaps successful in all his endeavors, and seemed to have almost covered many different bases, both being religiously tolerant but also religiously expansive, being sort of a great conqueror, but also, or a successful conqueror, but also a patron of the arts and literature, etc., and poetry too. So as for the content of the slide, so we have the title, Mahmud of Ghazni and the Ghaznavids. It was a Persian Muslim dynasty and empire of Turkic Mamluk origin, originally settled in Afghanistan, but they were ultimately defeated from those who came from Afghanistan, ironically perhaps. It was founded by the son of an ex-Samanid empire general and ruled parts of Persia, Khorasan, and northwest India. Important to know that early ex-Samanid heritage, because we've covered the Samanid Empire. If you've watched it, I'm grateful, and if you do, I'm very grateful as well. And if you do multiple times, I'm extra grateful. As for significant leader, Abu al-Qasim Mahmud ibn Sabuktigin. Empire was the Ghaznavid dynasty. The period was 977 to 1186 CE, which is considered the medieval period. The modern locations include Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Million square kilometers were 3.40, quite large, our average empire, and we only have the largest empires of all time, about 80, close to 90 perhaps, and the average is 1.7, so quite a bit larger, and also must be noted these are difficult areas to conquer. There's been empires existing here for centuries at this point, so not easy areas to conquer. Million square kilometers equivalent is 1.31, but still smaller than some of our other empires. For example, Abbasid and Umayyad caliphates are tied for the largest empires we've covered so far in this series, tied for 7th place, or in the over 11 million square kilometers, so a little bit smaller there. Percent of the world is 2.52%, excluding Antarctica. Still a very, very large area of land. Capital city was Ghazni from 977 to 1163 CE, and Lahore from 1163 to 1186 CE. That's sort of the decline period of the empire. The government was a hereditary monarchy by a sultan. The common languages were Persian, which was the official and the court languages. Arabic was the language of theology, and Turkic was the official military language. Maybe that's because their soldiers were of Turkic descent, and their theologians were Arabic, and their court were ruled by Persian individuals, most likely, I would hypothesize. The religion, where Sunni Islam was the dominant religion, and Hinduism, which was a majority in India, which they came to increasingly conquer. Population was in several to tens of millions, so perhaps maybe slightly larger than the Kievan Rus, which we've paired this with, or similar or even smaller than the Kievan Rus, but still quite large, maybe certainly smaller than this region includes today, especially on the Indian areas. However, the technology has changed over time. Population could be up to 90 million. 90 is in the tens of millions, but it's likely closer. Maybe we'll average it out, say around 10 million might be the average. And we'll say it's about similar, maybe slightly larger than the Kievan Rus Empire, which we've paired it with. And probably larger than most empires, certainly larger than our average largest empire geographically, and probably in terms of population as well. But there's also populations tend to grow over time because technologies improve. So, as for the images, in the top left we have Mahmud Ghazni receiving a robe of honor from the Caliph al-Qadir. We cannot see the Caliph al-Qadir because I wanted to zoom in on Mahmud of Ghazni himself, standing up on a chair, looking very regal, and receiving this famous robe. It looks quite regal and looks certainly quite happy, and looks actually quite like a fun guy, despite being such a militaristic individual. As for the other images, we have to the right of that we have the Ghaznavid fortress in Lakshari Bazaar in Lashkargah, which was an ancient post in southern Afghanistan. It was founded by Mahmud of Ghazni in 998, who reigned from 998 to 1030 CE. A beautiful, beautiful fortress I'd endeavor to someday visit. To the right of that we have a Masud III's minaret in Ghazni, which is at least 44 meters tall, before its top half crumbled in 1902 due to an earthquake. So beautiful, long structure. As we can see, hard to see, unfortunately I couldn't try to fit all these images. The horse is this size, so many horses tall. As for additional images, we have in the bottom right, a fight between Mahmud of Ghazni and Abu al-Simjuri of the Samanid Empire, which they originally were part of, produced by Injami al-Tawariq, 1306 to 1314. So produced after, but we can kind of get an image for how they might have dressed, but also to show the history, that how significant they were for literature and art to continue to write about their achievements. And we can see the Arabic text slightly cut off, but we can see some Arabic text as well showing the Arabic influences. And to the right, to the left of that, we have Mahmud of Ghazni receiving an Indian elephants as tribute, found in Majmu al-Tariq, written by Hafiz-i-Abru Herat, published in Herat, 1425. So showing the sort of common theme of this empire was its continuous move or endeavors in the Indian subcontinent. And here we can see it really manifested by its pinnacle, Mahmud of Ghazni, coming in contact with the Indian individuals with a tribute from an elephant as well, which is sort of the epitome of the Indian subcontinent or their military endeavors, but also their glory and greatness as well. I would say, because the elephant is the largest land animal. I have two maps. Actually, it was preceded by the Samanids, the Sufarid dynasty, the Mahmudids, the Faregunids, the Hindu Shahi, and the Emirate of Multan. Some of those we covered indirectly, some of them specifically, like the Samanids. Then it was succeeded by the Seljuk Empire and the Ghurid dynasty, two important empires which we will either cover specifically, likely, or indirectly, likely. Certainly the Seljuk Empire we will be covering explicitly, and the Ghurid dynasty, depending on the size, I will have to double check, we might cover that as well. But if not, we will cover it indirectly. I have two maps here, which is a little abnormal, but I couldn't find one that combined both information. I wanted to combine here, there's the Kukaids and the Buyids, which are sort of this considered intermezzo period after the Abbasid dynasty. So they're kind of subordinate states, but they're also semi-autonomous. So we will cover those as probably a group, as we did, for example, in our Chinese series on episodes on the warring states periods. But we can also see the Khaganate, the Oghuz, Yabgus, and the Khazars up here, the Western Chulukyas, the Pala Empire. But here, this map is particularly revealing because we can see the Ghaznavid Empire, but it doesn't show the shape here, so we need to see the shape. But we can see the Seljuk Empire, which we will cover. The Kievan Rus up here makes this map particularly valuable, which we just covered here. So the distance is very large, of course, but we can see them. Here's the Fatimid Caliphate, another empire we've covered. The Khitan Empire we've covered. The Song Dynasty we've also covered as well. So all starting to come around. And the Goryeo, the iconic Korean Empire, which I don't believe is on the list because I don't believe it's quite large enough, but I might add it perhaps as an additional one. So that is Mahmud of Ghazni and the Ghaznavids. And as for a comparison between Vladimir the Great and Mahmud of Ghazni. So as for their background and origins, so Vladimir the Great, Vladimir was born into the ruling family of the Kievan Rus, the son of Sviatoslav, Grand Prince of Kiev, and however, he was a bastard born from a servant woman of Varangian or Scandinavian origins, or perhaps even ethnically different to some degree, and he was raised in Novgorod, outside of Kiev, the capital, north of it, and became ruler of Kiev after a power struggle following his father's death. So perhaps unlikely, he did have it going for him that his father was king of Kiev, or prince of Kiev, but nonetheless, perhaps against odds, he became ruler. And a ruler who ultimately would make significant changes. Whereas Mahmud of Ghazni, Mahmud was born into the Ghaznavid dynasty, the son of Sabuk Tijan, the founder of the Ghaznavid Empire, and a Turkish slave girl. So perhaps also from perhaps not the strongest matrilineal side. And he was raised in the court, however, of Ghazni and succeeded his father as ruler of the Ghaznavid Empire after consolidating his power. But I think relatively, there were less of a struggle for him, Mahmud of Ghazni, to gain power than Vladimir the Great, according to the sources I've found. But it was both of them sort of did have it going for them on their father's side, but not necessarily on their mother's side. But the difference is Vladimir the Great perhaps had more brothers and more contention for the throne, but it's still Mahmud of Ghazni also had to deal with that as well, and maybe it was more difficult for Mahmud of Ghazni. As for their religious conversions, Vladimir the Great played a crucial role in the Christianization of the Kievan Rus, and Slavic peoples generally, even today. He converted to Byzantine Christianity, or Eastern Orthodox, and adopted Christianity as the official religion of the realm. The conversion had a significant cultural and political implications, shaping the future of the Kievan Rus and its relations with the Byzantine Empire as well. So it's perhaps strategic, but it's also shown that he went and explored the other religions too. So he did, perhaps it was from his own volition, or it was from his own religious fervor. As for Mahmud of Ghazni, Mahmud was a devout Sunni Muslim and played a pivotal role in spreading Islam in the Indian subcontinent. While he himself did not convert to Islam during his reign, he patronized Islamic scholars, built mosques, and supported the propagation of Islam through military conquest. I believe it's because he was Islam for his whole life, but he did not convert, and he did not necessarily change the course of the empire, or explicitly declare it. It was already such. His conquest of Hindu kingdoms in northern India were motivated, in part, however, by his desire to spread Islam, but he was also to some degree religiously tolerant. As for his military campaigns and conquests, or their campaigns and conquests, Vladimir the Great engaged in military conquests to expand and consolidate his realm. His conquests were primarily focused on neighboring Slavic tribes and territories. He also faced challenges from rival princes within the Kievan Rus, but managed to maintain control over Kiev and its environs. So more so perhaps characterized by the difficulties of ruling over federal state conflicting princes, for example, but he did have some successes against Slavic tribes. Whereas Mahmud of Ghazni, perhaps the superior in terms of campaigns and conquests, Mahmud's reign was characterized by extensive military campaigns, particularly in the Indian subcontinent. He launched numerous invasions in northern India, targeting Hindu kingdoms and temples. His conquest brought immense wealth and territory into the Ghaznavid Empire, establishing Ghazni as a major power in Central Asia. But perhaps maybe Vladimir the Great was still the better military general, and he might have, or leader, and he might have done better if they had switched positions. But as we can see, Mahmud of Ghazni claimed or had more successful conquests. For example, the 17 or 16 conquests in India, whereas Vladimir the Great was certainly successful, however, in his court in maintaining a federated state, which could in some ways be difficult, or more difficult for different reasons, perhaps. As for both of their respective cultural patronage, Vladimir the Great's reign saw the flourishing of Byzantine Christian culture in the Kievan Rus. He patronized Christian clergy, built churches, and promoted education and literacy. Vladimir's conversion to Christianity also facilitated cultural and religious exchanges with the Byzantine Empire. So very important cultural influences, but it's also sourced to his religious fervor as well, or his religious focus on Christianity. As for Mahmud of Ghazni, Mahmud was known for his patronage of Persian literature and art, perhaps a little distinct, not necessarily Islamic, but Persian, which is a little distinct as well, and scholarship, but Islamic as well, but Persian specifically was his interest. He attracted poets, scholars, and artisans to his court, making Ghazni a center for cultural and intellectual activity in Central Asia. So also embracing people from other regions, whereas Kiev might have embraced other princes. They was more so within the Kievan Rus, but they did embrace, for example, Byzantine visitors or even Arabic visitors. But perhaps Mahmud of Ghazni was particularly focused on bringing in people from outside of the state. Mahmud's court was renowned for its lavish patronage of Persian poetry and literature. So Persian seems to be a particular focus of his cultural or artistic focus or patronage focus, whereas Vladimir the Great was specifically focused, once again, on Christianity. As for their differences in legacy, Vladimir the Great is remembered as a pivotal figure in the history of Eastern Europe for his role in the Christianization of the Kievan Rus and promoting its cultural and political development. He is revered as a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, Saint Vladimir, and is celebrated in Russian and Ukrainian history and folklore. As for Mahmud of Ghazni, Mahmud's conquests expanded the boundaries of the Ghaznavid Empire and established Ghaznavid as a major political and cultural center in Central Asia. Also note, because he was, however, at the zenith, maybe he could have done a better job in his succession, though. He celebrated as hero in Persian literature and folklore, and immortalized in epic poems and legends for his military prowess and cultural patronage. So both sides of the sword there, particularly. So thus, one of Vladimir the Great and Mahmud of Ghazni were both significant rulers in their respective empires. They had distinct backgrounds, religious affiliations, military strategies and achievements, and cultural legacies. Vladimir's conversion to Christianity and consolidation of Kievan Rus contributed to the Christianization and cultural integration of Eastern Europe, while Mahmud's military conquests and patronage of Persian culture established Ghazni as a major center of power and learning in Central Asia, while also expanding significantly its territorial extent into the Indian subcontinent particularly. So that is this episode on the Kievan Rus and the Ghaznavid Empire, and as well Vladimir the Great and Mahmud of Ghazni respectively. I very much hope you enjoyed this episode. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. This is Cashcroft TV, and I'd be very, very grateful if you to continue to support. Thank you so much.